Hong Kong, April 1971. A humid spring night when the harbor air carried the smell of salt, diesel, and the restless electricity of a city that never truly sleeps. Victoria Harbor moved slowly under the lights, ships sliding through the darkness like quiet thoughts, while on the north side of the water a different kind of current was building inside the Hong Kong Coliseum. 20,000 people had come for a fight. They filled the arena the way crowds always do when something important is about to happen, rows of expectations stacked on top of each other, voices blending into a steady roar that never quite settled into silence. Programs rustled, cigarettes burned slowly between fingers. Cameras flashed in small bursts of white light. At the center of it all stood the ring. 4 ropes, a canvas floor. Bright lights above it turned the square of fabric into the most important place in the building. Tonight's main event was simple: the undefeated heavyweight champion of Asia versus a challenger no one expected to survive 10 rounds. But the fight that 20,000 people had come to watch had not yet begun, and already something had happened that would change the night. Because 3 rows from the ring sat a quiet woman in her late 50s. She was Bruce Lee's mother, and the heavyweight champion had just slapped her across the face. 20,000 people saw it. Only one man stood up: Bruce Lee. A warm spring night when the city carries the quiet restlessness that always settles over it after sunset. The harbor wind moved through the streets with the faint smell of salt water and diesel fuel, slipping between the tall concrete buildings that had grown out of the island over the past 2 decades like vertical declarations of ambition. Traffic moved slowly along the roads below, headlights flowing in long, patient lines. But several blocks away from the harbor, the movement of the city had begun to concentrate around a single destination: the Hong Kong Coliseum. From a distance it looked like any other arena, a large, functional structure designed not for beauty but for capacity, a place meant to hold noise, to contain anticipation, to gather thousands of people into a single enclosed space where something memorable might happen. Tonight, 20,000 people had come for that possibility. The sidewalks outside were crowded with ticket holders moving steadily toward the entrances. Vendors sold fight programs and cold drinks to anyone willing to stop for a moment. Taxi drivers leaned against their doors watching the crowd the way men who had spent years around arenas always watch crowds, with the quiet understanding that the more people arrive, the more likely it is that something worth remembering is about to occur inside. Inside the building, the arena lights burned bright above the ring. The square canvas sat at the center of the floor under a circle of white light so intense that it erased the shadows beneath the ropes. Around it, rows of red seats climbed upward in widening rings until they reached the darker upper levels where the cheapest tickets were located and the loudest voices usually came from. The air carried the familiar mixture that always fills arenas before a fight: cigarette smoke, spilled beer, perfume, and the warm, unmistakable scent of thousands of people gathered in one place waiting for violence. The crowd had been building since early evening. By 8 o'clock nearly every seat was filled. Men leaned forward in their chairs discussing predictions in confident voices. Some had money riding on the outcome and spoke about the fighters the way investors speak about markets, carefully, analytically, as if the right words might influence events already moving toward their conclusion. Others had come simply to watch, to witness 2 trained professionals test the limits of their bodies and their will beneath the unforgiving lights above the ring. Along the floor near the front rows sat several men whose names were known well beyond Hong Kong. Promoters, journalists, businessmen, people who had made careers around the strange economy of professional fighting. 3 rows back from the ring on the east side of the arena sat a quiet woman in a dark coat. Her name was Grace Lee. She was in her early 50s and carried herself with the calm posture of someone who had spent a lifetime raising a family and navigating the complicated realities of a rapidly changing world. Her hands rested lightly in her lap. Her eyes remained focused on the ring. She had attended fights before, though not many. The violence of professional boxing had never particularly interested her, but tonight was different. Tonight she had come to watch her son. Bruce Lee sat beside her. He wore a simple black shirt beneath a light jacket, the kind of clothing that allowed him to blend easily into any crowd. At first glance there was nothing about him that demanded attention, no dramatic gestures, no loud conversation. He sat quietly, observing. The way people who spend their lives studying movement and human behavior often sit alert without appearing alert, relaxed without ever becoming careless. Bruce Lee watched everything. The fighters warmed up in their corners during the preliminary bouts. the small adjustments trainers made between rounds, the rhythm of the crowd as excitement rose and fell with each exchange in the ring. He had spent most of his life studying combat in many forms: Wing Chun, Western boxing, wrestling, street fighting, philosophies of movement that stretched back centuries. To Bruce Lee, every fight was a classroom. Every movement revealed something. Every mistake explained something. The man fighting tonight's main event had built his reputation on destroying opponents quickly and convincingly. An undefeated heavyweight champion known for his strength and his willingness to end fights violently when the opportunity presented itself. The crowd loved him, not because he was graceful, but because he was unstoppable. Bruce Lee watched the arena slowly fill to its final capacity. 20,000 people, 20,000 separate lives gathered in one place for a single purpose: to watch a fight. None of them knew that the most important moment of the night had not yet happened, and when it did, it would have nothing to do with the championship belt waiting beside the ring. It would begin 3 seats away from where Bruce Lee was sitting, and it would change everything about the night. The lights in the Hong Kong Coliseum dimmed slightly as a low rumble swept through the crowd. The sound was expectant, almost reverential, like the city itself was holding its breath. Then came the entrance music, a simple, pounding rhythm that seemed to echo off every wall, a heartbeat for the champion. The doors at the far end of the arena opened, and there he appeared. Lin Iron Fist Zhao, the undefeated heavyweight champion of Asia. 6'5", more than 220 pounds of solid muscle, moving with the calm authority of a man who had never known defeat. Every eye in the room found him instantly. The roar of the crowd hit Bruce Lee like a wave, but he did not flinch. He merely leaned back slightly in his chair, observing, calculating, cataloging every movement. Zhao walked slowly to the ring, robe open to reveal his broad chest and taut abdomen, glistening under the arena lights. His hands swung lightly at his sides as if to remind the audience and his opponent that power was effortless for him. He was a living declaration. This space belonged to him. The crowd responded instinctively, some cheering, others whistling, all feeding the image he projected. Reputation had preceded him. Stories of his fights traveled faster than any official record. 12 consecutive knockouts in his last 12 matches. Opponents carried bruises and broken bones into the locker rooms after less than a round. Observers said it was his eyes that unsettled fighters, the way he studied them, silent, precise, measuring every micro-movement. Zhao never seemed rushed, he never seemed nervous. He simply existed in the center of the storm he created, unshakable and complete. As he moved closer to the ring, the subtle tactics of his dominance became apparent. He stopped once, midway along the aisle, and surveyed the crowd like a general evaluating his troops. A quick, sharp glance here, a slow, deliberate pause there. Those in his path felt the pressure of his gaze, even when he did not look directly at them. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others straightened automatically, a reflex to his presence. When Zhao reached the ring, he did not immediately climb in. He paused at the edge, hands resting lightly on the ropes, looking across the canvas with deliberate attention. His eyes swept over the ring corners, over the ropes, over the audience, and then they found her, Grace Lee. 3 seats to Bruce Lee's left. Quiet, composed, hands folded, posture perfectly straight. Zhao's lips curled slightly. The recognition was not immediate anger, nor curiosity. It was an assessment. He understood instinctively that she was connected to the young man sitting beside her. A challenger? Perhaps not officially, but someone dangerous, someone the arena had not yet accounted for. The psychological theater was deliberate. Zhao leaned casually against the ropes, letting his gaze linger just long enough to unsettle anyone in the immediate vicinity. The crowd felt it. A subtle shift passed through the first 5 rows, a ripple of unease. Mothers clutched purses tighter. Children leaned against fathers. Bruce Lee, as usual, remained entirely still. His eyes tracked Zhao's every motion, not with fear but with awareness. The champion's past victories and his unbroken record had earned him respect, yes, but also a certain arrogance. It was visible now in the tilt of his head, the slow rotation of his shoulders, the deliberate placement of his feet. Every micro-movement screamed, "I am untouchable. I am the measure of all things in this ring." Opponents did not simply fight Zhao, they endured him. They measured themselves against his aura before throwing a single punch. For Bruce Lee, the observation was more than just tactical. It was information. Every eye movement, every pause, every shift in weight was a data point. Zhao had prepared this spectacle as carefully as he had trained his body, but Bruce Lee was not here to react. He was here to understand. And he understood that the champion had underestimated more than the young fighters in the ring. He had underestimated the quiet, invisible observer sitting 3 seats away from his next target, and at that moment, Zhao had not yet realized that the fight he was about to begin would not be fought on his terms at all. The crowd's roar had reached its peak, filling the Hong Kong Coliseum with a wave of sound that pressed against the canvas, the ropes, the very air inside. Lin Iron Fist Zhao remained at the center of the ring, hands resting lightly on the ropes, surveying the audience with the calm arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. His eyes lingered on Grace Lee for a moment longer than necessary, and the whisper of recognition turned into something sharper, something deliberate. He spoke, though his words were not meant to travel to every corner of the area they were meant to land, like a knife, on one target. "That's the boy's mother," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by those in the first rows. "Came all this way to watch her son fail." A ripple of unease moved through the front rows. Heads turned, eyes widened, mothers clutched purses tighter, children leaned closer to their fathers. But Grace Lee remained perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze calm. She did not flinch, she did not speak. She did not give him the reaction he wanted. Zhao smiled, a slow, cruel curve of his lips, and took a step closer to the edge of the ring, leaning over the ropes as if to inspect the situation more intimately. "Your son is too small to compete here," he said, loud enough for the front rows to hear clearly. "He doesn't belong." The arena, accustomed to spectacle, paused. The murmur of anticipation faltered. Spectators who had come for the fight suddenly realized that something entirely unanticipated was occurring. A championship match was not supposed to include public humiliation of a spectator. And yet here it was. Then, without warning, Zhao extended his hand and struck Grace Lee across the face. The slap was not the force of a trained boxer's knockout, but it was deliberate, contemptuous, designed to humiliate, to assert dominance. It carried enough impact to make her head snap slightly, to draw a thin line of red where the skin broke against the weight of intention. A hush fell over the arena. 20,000 people had come to witness a fight, but none had been prepared for this. The sound of the slap seemed amplified in the sudden silence. Cameras flashed instinctively, capturing the moment, but no image could convey the weight of it, the violation of expectation. Grace Lee's hands rose instinctively, pressing a cloth against her face. Blood seeped between her fingers, yet her posture did not falter. Her back remained straight. Her eyes remained clear. She did not scream. She did not cry. She did not retreat. It was then that Bruce Lee moved, slowly, purposefully. He did not react with panic or anger. There was no hurry in his motion, no flailing or shouting. He stood as one might stand after considering every possibility, weighing every variable, and deciding on a single inevitable course. The people immediately around him felt the shift before they saw it. Something in the arena changed. It was the subtle pressure of inevitability, a quiet authority that spread outward from the man who had decided that inaction was no longer an option. The murmur of the crowd thickened into a palpable tension, a current that everyone could feel but no one could name. Bruce Lee's eyes locked on Zhao, and for the first time in the night, the champion sensed unease. The arrogance, the confidence, the untouchable persona, all of it wavered for a fraction of a second. Zhao had miscalculated. He had assumed fear, assumed submission, assumed silence. But the man sitting beside the woman he had struck was not the kind of man who reacted. He was the kind who acted. Every spectator in the first 5 rows registered it. A subtle movement, a change in posture, a quiet rise from a seat. Yet in that stillness was the weight of inevitability, the kind that changes the dynamic of an entire arena without a single word being spoken. The silence stretched, thick and electric, broken only by the faint shuffle of trainers moving near the ropes, unaware that the real confrontation had already begun. Bruce Lee was standing now, and the arena knew it. Something was coming, something that no one had predicted, something that would be remembered far longer than any championship belt. And in those seconds, before his first step toward the ring, the narrative of the night shifted entirely. The fight that everyone had come to see was no longer the one scheduled. The fight that mattered had begun. The air in the Hong Kong Coliseum changed the moment Bruce Lee stepped forward. It was subtle at first, a vibration, a shift in the tension of 20,000 bodies packed into rows and aisles. The front rows sensed it immediately, a presence moving through the chaos like a silent wind, Deliberate, unrelenting, inevitable. Four men, arena security and Zhao's corner men, moved instinctively to intercept him. Hands reached, arms grabbed, shoulders pressed against him, attempting to restrain what had not yet begun. Bruce Lee did not struggle. He did not resist. He simply moved. And as he moved, the men around him became part of the equation, not obstacles but weights to be managed. Each adjustment, each subtle shift in leverage was precise, invisible, decisive. Within a few steps, Bruce Lee had reached the ring. The ropes were the first barrier. He slid his left foot through the bottom, lifted himself gracefully, and found his balance on the canvas. The crowd fell silent, the kind of silence that sweeps through a stadium when everyone realizes that the rules have changed. This was no longer a fight scheduled for the next 10 rounds. This was something entirely new. Lin Iron Fist Zhao looked down at him from the center of the ring, brow furrowed slightly, lips curling into a mixture of mockery and disbelief. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice carrying across the ring, amplified by years of dominance. "Go back to your seat before someone gets hurt." Bruce Lee's eyes remained calm. He said nothing. No words, no reaction to the taunt. Only a measured step closer, a movement that compressed the distance between them without haste or hesitation. Zhao's confidence flickered for the first time that evening, though he masked it with the ease of practiced arrogance. Then Zhao made his move. The first punch, a simple jab, textbook in form, intended to establish distance and assess his opponent. It traveled toward Bruce Lee's face with the expectation of impact, of resistance. But the man in black was no ordinary target. He had studied such movements countless times, understood the mechanics before they occurred, and existed in a state of motion where attack failed to intersect with his body. The jab found only empty air. Zhao's hand cut through nothingness, momentum carrying him slightly forward. And in that fraction of a second, less than a heartbeat, Bruce Lee struck. It was not a flurry, not a display. It was a single, decisive movement. His fist found Zhao's solar plexus, transferring all the weight, precision, and efficiency of a lifetime of martial training into a point no human body anticipates. The sound was subtle yet unmistakable, a compression, a sudden implosion of force that resonated outward, heard clearly by the front rows. Zhao's eyes widened, the calculation of a lifetime interrupted by a variable he had never encountered. His body froze, then buckled, and finally collapsed in the center of the ring. Time slowed in the arena. 20,000 people held their breath, the roar of expectation transformed into stunned silence. Cameras flashed, but none could capture the weight of the moment, the impossibility of it, the undeniable truth that had just occurred in 8 seconds. Bruce Lee stood above him, black shirt clinging to his lean frame, hands at his sides, eyes calm, expression unreadable. He did not gloat. He did not raise his fists in triumph. He merely occupied the space he had entered, the canvas beneath him asserting his presence with the quiet authority of inevitability. The men who had tried to restrain him earlier stepped back, unsure what to do next. Zhao's corner men hesitated, then approached, faces pale, hands raised not in defiance but in caution. Officials hovered at the edges, uncertain of protocol, uncertain of reality. The arena itself seemed to hold its breath, and then slowly consciousness returned to the crowd. Murmurs began at the edges of the arena, building into a wave that surged through the rows. Whispers of disbelief, questions asked aloud, gasps, shouts. Cameras clicked frantically. But all of it was secondary to the truth. The undefeated heavyweight champion of Asia had been struck by a man in street clothes, and he had fallen, unable to continue, in front of 20,000 witnesses. Bruce Lee did not move. He did not speak. He only observed, eyes returning briefly to Grace Lee, seated 3 seats away. There was a subtle nod, and she returned it. The exchange was private in its significance, yet witnessed by thousands. In those 8 seconds, a fight had ended before it began, and an entire arena had witnessed the impossible. 8 seconds. One movement. And the narrative of the night, of every memory of that ring, had changed forever. The ring was quiet now, but not in the ordinary sense of anticipation. This was a deeper quiet, the kind that descends after a storm when every person in a crowd realizes they have witnessed something that defies description. 20,000 people were still seated, but the noise that had filled the Hong Kong Coliseum moments ago had been replaced by a shared unspoken awe. Bruce Lee stepped from the canvas, sliding his foot over the bottom rope with the same deliberate grace he had used to enter. He moved toward Grace Lee without haste. There was no flourish, no dramatic gesture. The fight of the night, the spectacle of violence had already ended. What mattered now was something more human, more immediate. Her hands were pressed lightly to the cut above her eyebrow, but her posture remained impeccable. She had endured the slap without flinching, without sound, and in doing so had claimed a quiet dignity that few in the arena fully understood. Bruce Lee knelt briefly, offering a handkerchief, not as an audience-facing display, but as a simple, necessary gesture. She accepted it without words. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that moment was an entire conversation, acknowledgement, understanding, respect. No applause was needed. Around them, the arena slowly began to breathe again. The spectators were not yet certain how to react. Some whispered to neighbors. Some remained frozen in their seats. The journalists in the press row had their pens poised, yet none wrote immediately. Their minds were scrambling to categorize what had happened, to force the event into the familiar framework of boxing, of sport, of spectacle, but nothing fit. Bruce Lee returned to his seat afterward, quietly straightening his jacket. He did not bask in the attention. He did not offer commentary or explanation. He simply observed. The front rows gradually began to murmur. The roar returned, slower at first, then growing, as if the arena itself was finding a way to honor what had occurred without words. But the cheers, the clapping, the shouting, these were secondary. They were afterthoughts. The true measure of the night had been silent, deliberate, complete. Grace Lee remained seated, hands folded, back straight. She had come to watch her son fight, but what she had witnessed was something beyond a fight. She understood instinctively that power was not always a matter of force, speed, or brute strength. True strength, she realized, was composed, controlled, precise. Invisible to those who were not paying attention. Bruce Lee's eyes scanned the ring one last time before settling on the crowd. Not in triumph, but in quiet acknowledgement. Every person in the arena had experienced the tension, the anticipation, the shock of the impossible. Yet the lesson was subtle. The greatest actions are not those performed for applause, or for recognition, or for the spectacle. They are those performed with complete mastery over oneself, with calm control, and with the unwavering understanding of what must be done. Outside the Colosseum, the streets of Hong Kong carried on in their usual rhythm. The neon lights reflected in puddles from an earlier drizzle. Taxis moved through the night. Vendors closed up shop. And yet inside, within those walls, 20,000 people had borne witness to a quiet demonstration of human potential. Bruce Lee left the arena later that night. He walked through the streets, unhurried, anonymous, blending into the city he had always known. Grace Lee returned home with her son's championship belt, holding it on her lap as if it were the tangible measure of something deeper. Night where strength was proven without the need for performance, where the impossible had been executed calmly, deliberately, and with complete control. And in the quiet after the chaos, the lesson lingered. True power is not loud. It is not performed for admiration. It is calm. It is controlled. It exists fully in the moment, independent of audience applause or approval. It simply is. The Colosseum, the city, and the 20,000 people who had witnessed it all would never forget the night when a man in a black shirt demonstrated that strength is measured not in noise or spectacle, but in the quiet, unshakable mastery of oneself.